Hey everyone, and welcome to What's in the Box. So in this episode, we're going to consult the mystery box to try to learn more about items that we're kind of familiar with, maybe have some regular interaction with that have changed over time, sometimes a lot and sometimes a little. And maybe we can use today's mystery box to overcome some nightmares. So let's start by looking at what is inside the box for today's episode. We have an assorted box of dental tools. So here in our archives, we have quite an extensive collection. And one area that we have a lot of information on and artifacts for dentistry. So today's collection, the items that we're going to look at all come from the Dr. George Boyd collection. And George Boyd was a dentist in Jonesboro for over 50 years. So we have quite a lot of dental tools and instruments that we can look at. And what I wanted to do was kind of look at them and then kind of talk about maybe how they've changed over the last 50 to 100 years, and maybe how they haven't changed that much. So the first item that we're going to look at here is a tooth key. Now, a tooth key here has a T-shaped handle and an attachment that can pivot, right? And so it actually, if you use this to go around a tooth or possibly a crown, and you can put it against the base, and then you can rotate the handle here to extract the tooth or the crown that you're trying to get out of the mouth. Now, the tooth key originates around the 18th century, so it's a tool that's been around for quite a while, although not quite as commonly used today as some of the other dental tools that we're going to look at. Most of the items that we're going to look at today are probably the early to mid 1900s. Not a lot of specific dates on them, as we'll talk about as we go through each item, including this one, which does not have a specific date. Now, the next item we're going to look at are actually three, and these are forceps or pliers. And as you can see, they look like pliers. This is described as being used for maybe extracting a root from the top of the mouth, the top tooth root. And so it's more of a needle nose forceps plier. All of these are metal instruments with ridged handles, which would provide a good grip for the tool that they are being used for. This item here is described as being a lower extractor and different shape here along the top of the tool that would be used to actually do the extraction. But if you notice, similar style, similar make. Now, our last one here is a little bit more specific in its description, is described as being used for a lower molar extraction. Now, this one also has the word Nashville branded on it, and it is the name of a company, Nashville Dental Company, which sold items for dentists. And you will see, looking at some of the items that we have, a lot of brands sort of built right into each item. And so that gives us some information on trying to date them and trying to locate when or where they were made, and possibly an approximate time period of when they might have been used. But this one, same thing with the handle hook here, gives you more leverage to try to do the extraction that you're trying to do. Now, the next item here is a plugger. And this has been a hard item to try to identify, not identify, but to date and to place a strict function with. There are several examples in different collections, archival and online collections, but they look a little bit different than this one. Some of them have vulcanized rubber handles on them. This one is strictly metal. There is a rotation piece here at the end that does not seem to connect to anything else. The top bit here seems to possibly be something you could extract, but there's also a hole there towards the top, and the curve here at the very end of the tip might make it possible to plug in a filling or some item that would be used to fill in a tooth. And it's very possible that this would have been used for gold foil or some other type of foil or other materials that aren't as commonly used today in terms of filling teeth when you go to the dentist. Our next item, this is a leather case. And in this case, we have syringes. This is possibly the origin of people's dental nightmares. This is what people, I think, might expect when they go to the dentist sometimes. But as you can see, there are two sets. There are 6 items total, 2 sets of 3. And it looks like a larger set and a smaller set. And this is, again, where research comes in talking with Dr. Mike Mefford, who's a practicing dentist. He suggested it's possible that these are a set for maybe pediatric care and then a set for adults, because one of the syringes and one of the sets is smaller than the other one. Both of the syringes are glass syringes. They didn't really have replaceable parts. So this item would have to have been sanitized multiple times and then used multiple times to actually serve its function. But we have the 2 syringes labeled, and then we have saliva extractors labeled as well, which are part of this kit. And then we have 2 other pieces that were not labeled or identified that Dr. Mefford identified as possibly being used to hold the cheek in place while you're administering the sedative that you're putting in place. This is one of the biggest examples of evolution in terms of the items that we have, because it is something that is recognizable. It is definitely a kit for administering some sort of drug, in this case, a sedative of some sort, but it's also not quite the way that things are done today. So to find out a little bit more about how these items maybe changed over time and how people in fields can maybe learn about their field by learning about the past of their field, and how we can help people, even people who aren't historians, use changes in their field and sort of understanding how things used to be done versus how they're done now, to continue to show how things evolve over time. To learn more about that, we're going to talk to Dr. Mike Mefford and dive a little bit more in detail about some of these dental items. All right, so I guess that's Dr. Mike Mefford here, talking about some of our dental items. So what has kind of changed from these items? Talk about syringes and giving anesthesia. That's in practice hasn't changed, but the mode of delivery has changed. So how much of your I guess dentistry items have, I guess, improved over time?
I think maybe the good news for us and our patients is they've improved a lot.
Less scary.
Less scary in some ways. The fundamental design of a lot of this stuff is a lot the same. If we're talking about some of those, the forceps.
Yeah, we've been talking about the forceps, and pretty similar.
And some things like an extraction. There's probably the least that's changed in anything that we do now, aside from if we're talking about fundamental, core differences. Some of those forceps I could take back and match up pretty closely with what we use now. There's difference with manufacturing processes and the ease of use and some other design features, but some of those are all very similar and readily identifiable to what we use today. Some of these other ones, like this key, I'm intrigued with that. We have nothing that looks like that at all. But I have some things I think that work maybe as an evolution of those. Seeing these and then associating them with some of our current instrumentarium is not a stretch.
Yeah.
For most of it. Some of the other things, scratching my head on a few of them, and so there's some restorative techniques that have changed.
Yeah.
Over the past 100 years that have been a departure that's so far that I don't understand.
Yeah.
Maybe even what it was used for, because it was several generations behind in any materials.
Yeah, and so like even like practicing now, you'd have to go back and research like exactly what ancestor of the current equipment is.
Right.
Right. So how much, like, how useful is it to know some of the history of this stuff? Because you mentioned the syringes, like this syringe was probably used multiple times, but it's glass. It's like there's not a lot of single-use stuff, so hygiene has changed a lot. So
immeasurably, and thankfully, So as far as changes go, sure, some of those have changed a tremendous amount. I'd lose my license quickly for using something like, and nor would I even would want to. It's amazing the difference. Knowing it was the best they had was okay, but
yeah. Well, it's cool because obviously not a historian, but for me, I'm not a dentist. So one thing that you talk about this stuff kind of opened my eyes to is the size difference. So you probably got a syringe kit here that's for pediatrics and then for adults. I would have never made that connection, and it was not in our database. So it's good to take that information back as well. But so I think it is useful to kind of see how some of the stuff has changed, and hopefully, like people that watch this will feel better about the dentist today. Sure. Even if you're naturally afraid of dentists, like it could have been worse.
And I think having an understanding of understanding the history for us, everything that we do has been built on some practice. We were always practicing. It's a little cliche of a phrase, but we were always kind of pioneering things. Things are always getting incrementally better. And knowing kind of where dentists started, say 100 years ago, does give us a good perspective on maybe, if anything, providing some solidarity to the things that we're using. What are the things that have still stood the test of time that haven't changed? And if maybe it's as a testament to the original design, if it hasn't changed much, it certainly has had the opportunity to. So it's still maybe a good working model. Whereas other things that we do, the premise of some of this is still there, but doing it vastly different with different instruments. But at least most of it's identifiable.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
All right. So again, we can learn quite a bit about the past and things that have come before us by looking at items and artifacts. Even if you're not a historian, for example, Dr. Mefford was able to pretty readily identify a lot of this stuff just simply by looking at it and recognizing the tools that he currently uses today and finding similarities. The biggest similarities seem to be in the forceps, right, where you can see a lot of similar style and function in today's instruments versus the ones that we have here in our archive. Sometimes if something is put in place that works and is effective, maybe it doesn't need to change that much over time. One other thing that we can take from the artifacts that we have here, again, identifiers. We talked about this in previous episodes. You can look for specific items. In one case, we have the word Nashville printed. We have several tools that were made by S.S. White, which is still a functioning practice, dental supply practice that's been around since the 1840s. With a scope of history that big, it's hard to narrow down exactly when their tools that we have were manufactured, but it's a large sample size, and it gives us a tie to the present because it's a company that has been around for such a long time that you can just even look at their back catalogs and see how some of the stuff has progressed over time. So when you were doing history research, look for items, look for descriptors, and if you don't know what it is or what it might be, consult the experts, which is always a good rule of thumb. So that is it for today's episode. Thank you again for joining us, and keep an eye out for future episodes where we continue to try to look at what's in the box to help us think outside of the box when it comes to history. As always, you can like and subscribe to us here on YouTube and follow us on social media to keep up to date with all of our content digitally and in person and otherwise at the Heritage Alliance and the Chester Inn Museum. Thanks.